very pleased today to have Robbie Seay with us. I've had the privilege of meeting Robbie a year and a half ago or something like that, and then having some delightful conversations. In the last 30 minutes, we've been having some really deep conversation and things that I think at least we think are important, and that maybe you would like to hear about as well. Robbie became a Baylor student in 1995, and then became one of the worship leaders at UBC along with David Crowder and his brother Chris. In 1999, he moved to Houston and reunited with Chris to found Ecclesia Church near downtown. And he has served as the worship pastor there for 12 years, and most recently as an elder in this Christian community. He's best known for his career as a songwriter and a recording artist and a worship leader. Founding the Robbie Seay Band in 2001, this band has released 7 albums, including the critically acclaimed 2007 EMI release, Give Yourself Away. There are lots of other things you can read about Robbie and his work on websites and Googling and all kinds of stuff, and it's fun and fascinating just to kind of see what all you find when you look at all of that. But more importantly, Robbie is a person who deeply loves the church and cares about his family and cares about the same kinds of things that you care about. And you will engage with him today at that level. And I've been very excited about his coming to Baylor this fall, and about talking to you, and about the ways that your intersection with his life might actually be a catalyst for changing our world. And that's the kind of thing that really motivates me to appreciate what we're doing today. So, Robbie, thank you so much for being here, and we'll hear you gladly. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I did some half an hour with Dr. Bradley, and I'm just a bit smarter already. It's funny because you sometimes can leave, at least for me, I left Baylor and I had a lot of things I needed to work through. It's great to come back here and feel like I've wrestled with some things. And then I sit down with Dr. Bradley, who he has the answers for the things that I've spent 13 years wrestling with. You guys are really blessed to have him leading. And Dr. Music, I still am amazed that there's a music professor. That's the coolest thing ever. I'm grateful to be with you guys. I was here many years ago. In fact, the last time we played on campus, I was talking to a few freshmen. I think it was the Christmas tree lighting just a few years ago. And we played at Common Grounds a few times since then. The last time on campus, these guys were chatting with me, and they said, did you live on campus at all? Or, we live in Penland. And I said, yeah, I lived in Penland. And they said, when was that? And I knew immediately I was about to sound old, but I didn't realize how old. I said, well, that was 95 was when I was here. And this freshman student says, oh, I was 2. And I thought, this conversation is over. So it has been a long time, and I'm sure, again, you've probably heard this 1,000 times, but my time since Baylor has really flown by. The further I am removed from it, the more I love stepping back on campus. This is really an amazing place. I hope your years here are beautiful and they're transforming and really challenging, because I know that they are. So I came here in '95. I grew up in the church. I grew up around a lot of church music. In fact, I was in one of those families. Maybe you were, maybe you weren't. But I was in one of those families that we all sang together, which for a brief time was pretty great, and then for a lot of years was horrible. I hated the idea that I was somehow in some singing revival all the time. And we didn't necessarily we weren't in a bus traveling the country, but we just sang a lot in our church, and I was always, my dad, we were leading these 4-part kind of quartet things, and I just despised it. I came here thinking that music might be a part of what I do, but I was hoping to just disconnect from a lot of that. And I spent 3.5 years here that really there was very little disconnection. In fact, God opened my soul to Him and to music in a way that I never really imagined. When I started school, my oldest brother was right here. He had just started a church called BC, and he said, this very awkward, tall, skinny guy named David Crowder is David would pick me up at 6 in the morning and we would go set up the sound system in the Hippodrome Theater. That's where we met back then. And for me, those 2 years, full of Sunday early mornings, I began to get a glimpse into what I might be doing, what my role might be, what God had put deep within me that I would somehow respond to years later. And what I mean by that is I thought I would disconnect from the church. I thought my music would somehow be apart from the church, and yet every morning, every Sunday morning, every week in my college years, I was right in the middle of a new community. And what I saw for the first time was songs and songwriting coming from the local body. And I didn't grow up like that. I don't know about you, but I didn't, again, I'm quite a bit older than you, but when I grew up in the church, it was very much just a culture of replication, a culture of duplication. And so somebody somewhere was writing and responding to God and was, the psalmist of our days. And, it was kind of left up to the rest of us to duplicate that, to replicate that inside our own hands. Does that make sense? I didn't really have any concept that there might be a calling to voice the prayers of a local church, that you somehow part of this whole thing would be you responding to what God's doing in you and your community, right? And so for the first time, really, my friend David Crowder, I got to see that up close. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always great, and he wrestled with a lot of things, but I began to go, God, maybe I am what I thought I was going to run from is what you call me. What I love about music and what I love about what you guys have ahead of you is that this is not a business school. There's not an easy, spelled out roadmap for you. And if we were to meet back here in 15 years, each of you will have a very unique, different story and journey and travel. I love that about music. I love that about the church. What excites me about when I come back to Baylor and I get to actually interact with students. And again, we're on campus and sometimes I don't get to hang with you guys as much. What just fires me out is to see the passion you have for not only music but for the church. And so, because we're not in business school, I hesitate to say, well, this is how you do it, or this is how it's done, or this is what I did. Because most likely your story will be very different from mine. I left Baylor in early '99, and I moved to Houston. My brother Chris, we're from, anybody from Houston in the room? There's usually a few of us. I love Houston, in spite of its humidity and mosquitoes and traffic, and a few other things we can probably hate on Houston for. But I love Houston. I love the people of Houston. I love the Texans, which is good. You love Texans. I love Tex-Mex. I'm a Tex-Mex junkie. I love the city. We moved back to that city and to start a church. And if you've been in Houston, or you're from Houston, or even if you're from Dallas or San Antonio, the last thing that you think we really need in those cities is more churches. There's churches on every corner. What are we starting a church for? And honestly, that was my first reaction when brother said, "Hey, I'd like to move back." I had moved back. Chris was still here, right, at UBC. He said, I think we're going to move back, and I'd like to start a church. I'd like you to join me. And my first reaction was, there's churches like at every corner, like literally, why would we start? Why would we start a church? And we began to unpack that a little bit. The Montrose neighborhood of Houston is where we would go hear concerts. It's where we would go to art galleries. It's where we would, it's where we spent a lot of time as young citizens of Houston. But what I began to realize was there really weren't churches in that neighborhood. There wasn't any church that was effectively reaching out to younger folks that were a part of that community. And so in '99, we started Ecclesia Church, and I pray that several of you will be a part of the church. There's nothing like, we started in an apartment. My brother had a big enough apartment that we could cram 20 people into. I, literally was coming from Baylor. I had gotten married, and I still did not have a full grasp. I felt like I knew in here what God had called me to do. I had some training, I had some people in my life here at Baylor that were kind of pouring into that. I was scared to death about what that might look like. I'd always thought, again, that, like my business major friends, that I would at least have some kind of roadmap, some kind of like, here's how you do it, right? And starting that church, I just was like, I have no idea what I'm doing at all. I had written a few songs in college. I began to consider myself as like a hack songwriter. Still probably better do that. But I didn't understand how that might be a part of digging roots and starting a church, right? And so in the fall of '99, we said, let's do this. And I remember sitting in that apartment, just my hands shaking as I played guitar, thinking, I'm not sure if I'm up to this. I kind of thought I would have this team of people we would kind of do this together, and we could, live or die together. But this was a totally new idea. Somehow I was responsible for these people, responsible for leading them somewhere and inviting them into something. And for about a year, that was a big wrestling in my life. And again, my hope is that you lead Baylor, you wrestle with that. Whether you're a worship leader, whether you're, we were talking about some friends who are organists, whether you play the organ, whether you are a songwriter and composer. My hope is that you have a season of wrestling, digging deep with what God's called you to do. And the thing I love about Baylor is it will prepare you for it, but ultimately it's in that wrestling that you'll find God anyway. And that was me in that first year. We had started this church, and here we go. A few years later, as we began to write, record music, what I began to see in the songs, and that really where my life as a musician, my life as a songwriter began to take a big turn. So when I started to look in the songs, and I was telling Dr. Bradley earlier that you look at the Psalms and you don't necessarily see the best 401k package or the best scenario for paying your bills, or you don't really see a path to success as a musician or a minister or whatever it is God's called you to do. You really see life being lived in a pretty raw and sometimes messy way, and you see a lot of faith and trust, and you see some doubt, and you see some in the middle of the wars, some pretty intense wrestling with God. And I began to relate to some of that. I just thought, I may not be at war, but I do feel like David and these other songs are voicing some of the things that are going on here. And I began to imagine what it meant for me to serve in a community and take on that role. I had been pretty wrapped up and consumed with how am I going to pay my bills, who am I going to be, what's my name going to be considered, what's my legacy, whatever that means, what kind of records am I going to record, what kind of song am I going to write. We're just pretty consumed with what I was doing, and I look at the songs and I just don't see it. I see guys that are living, and music, life, and songs are coming from that life being lived, right? And many years ago I was in Nashville, and when you go to Nashville, there's an expectation that you sit down and you just write songs. A lot of these songwriters, they blow my mind, especially these guys in country music, which I'm not a big country music fan, but I have the utmost respect for country music writers because they basically just sit down, turn a switch on somewhere deep within their brain or within their heart, and they write these songs that are amazingly catchy and good. And I struggled with that, man, because I just thought, I didn't go to Nashville and feel like I could just sit down and write a song. But what I began to see in the songs was that a lot of really great, passionate, honest stuff was coming from life. And if there was one thing I could do, I could live, I could love, I could be in relationships that challenged me. I could respond to the way God spoke to me through Scripture and the Holy Spirit leading my life. I could listen to great music. I could travel. I could live life fully in the joys and in the tragedies of life. I could potentially maybe sit down and try to write something that would express not only what I was going through, but maybe what else my community was going through. huge turning point in my life, again, was one, when I looked deep into the Psalms, and two, was when a young lady in our church was diagnosed with cancer. And if you're in this room, you probably got somebody in your life. Cancer's been a part of our journey, all of our journeys. And a good friend of ours named Sarah. She was diagnosed with cancer. She was a teacher. She attended our church. She led a small group. She was a friend of ours. She was engaged to my friend Eric. She was beautiful. And she went in for a routine kind of checkup on her. She had to deal with her arm or something. And I don't know what they noticed, but it triggers a test. And sure enough, she had cancer spread all throughout her body. And it sucked. For about 6 months, she was dying. And for the first time in my life, my experience with somebody close to me, her experience became our experience. The church was lamenting. And again, it was a turning point, because the first time in my life I thought, I've got an obligation to be a part of that as a musician, as a songwriter. And so when I open the Psalms, I see 30 or 40 of these songs. Deep, intense laments. And I thought, I can't do a lot of things. I can't fix her. I can't make this right. But I can probably express what's happening here among us. And that's a huge shift for me. That had always been maybe somebody else's job. Again, I had grown up thinking, music within the church comes from afar, and I'll just figure out how to duplicate it. That's not to say I don't devalue songs that we all get to share. So there's certain songs that your community is singing, that my community is singing. That's a beautiful thing. We've got an intense history of songs that have connected us all. It's beautiful, and it'll always be part of what we do. But again, for the first time in my life, I thought, I've got an obligation as a songwriter. And I may not write the best song, this may not be anything that goes beyond these walls, but I've got an obligation out of my love for the church, my love for Christ, and my role here that I need to be a part of it. So we wrote a song called Lament, We Cannot Wait. We recorded that song, and it became a song for my church. And I thought, man, if somebody else gets to hear this, it means something great. It shifted the way that I do my music, the way I do my connection to the church. And so, my prayer for you guys is that you leave Baylor and you leave it as excellent musicians. Some of you as excellent songwriters. Some of you as composers. And some of you could run circles around me musically. And I love the fact that you're here under such great leadership. My hope is also that in the next season of life, you get challenged and you find yourself in a place where you feel called to express yourselves honestly and openly in a way that maybe you never thought you would. And we were chatting earlier before you guys got here just about what's happening in music in church. And I've been signed to EMI Records for many years. That's a great thing. My publishing is with them. There's a lot of great things I can tell you about that. But what we're seeing now is a lot less business and commerce driving music in the church. And what that leaves the church is a lot of younger songwriters and artists and musicians who really are hoping to express themselves honestly, no matter what income or revenue sources are there. And I'm a huge Johnny Cash fan. I love Johnny Cash, right? And we were talking about Johnny Cash a couple of years ago, and I love the Walk the Line. When you guys have seen him walk, it's beautiful. And there's that scene where he's in Sun Studios in Memphis, right? And he walks in, and he's not Johnny Cash at that point, right? He's this, recently out of the service, he's trying to figure out the music, part of what I do. He walks in, he's like, I got some songs to play. You guys remember this? And he plays the old gospel song, and the guy says, honestly, that's enough. I heard that song exactly like that. And what he begins to unravel in Johnny Cash is this deeper current that he actually was already in, that he didn't know was okay, right? thought that, this whole idea of me being a musician and me doing this for a living meant this, right? And he had a lot of things going on in him that were a more honest and a greater expression of him that he didn't know was okay. And I love that scene because he kind of has this realization like, okay, well, I didn't realize I could be me. And I think of that scene when I think about what you guys will face. Again, your music won't look exactly like my music. Some of you have a training and skill that I can only dream about having. Whatever that looks like for you, though, I hope that we get a Johnny Cash moment where we get to kind of unlayer and unravel what's deep within you. And Johnny Cash is not the best singer. He's not the best songwriter. He's not a very good guitar player. He's usually 4 or 5 chords, and he can play just about any of his songs. But most people look at Johnny Cash and go, I believe him. I believe what he's singing, And so my hope is that all of these kind of outside things that are happening with the music industry changing and revenue sources changing, and your job may look different. You may work in a church, you might not. I don't know what all that looks like, but what I do know is that I was able to have some of those moments where life began to unravel what was actually going on a little deeper within me. And that's where I felt like, man, I think this is something God's got me. That's what I hope for you guys. Is that we have those kind of moments. I have a love for the church. Like Bradley said that. I have a love for God's calling for us to serve the local church. I would reiterate too that when we started Ecclesia 13 years ago, my thought was my obligation is music in the church. 13 years later, I feel a strong obligation to actually be a small part of the church and someone who is living and breathing and loving and losing and celebrating in a way that allows me the honor and the humble privilege of standing and having something to sing and to lead them to. Does that make sense? And that's something that doesn't ever go away. I have 4 kids in my house, right? So they obviously are a big part of my life. And I remember when we were pregnant with our first, my oldest boy was 10 and a half. And so my wife is pregnant. I'm a young musician. I'm trying to be a songwriter. I'm trying to figure out what the heck. How does all this work? And I had this great fear that, by having this son, this is incredibly self-centered, but by having this son, that somehow creativity and my hopes of being a songwriter were going to be gone. I had this new obligation. And I remember holding my son in my arms and thinking, I can write 1,000 songs. I've never felt so alive. I've never felt so inspired, right? And through my kids and through the love of my wife and through, again, stories within our church, these are the things that get poured into songs. It's one thing to leave here trained. You guys will. This is one of the best places in the country. It's another thing to leave here and live life in a way that's inspiring you to actually do something with the training. Right? And so, I'm just convinced. I was just telling Dr. Bradley, I spent some time in South Florida. I have good friends and pastors. And they have they have just been in the mud at this very large Presbyterian church, and they've just been in the mud trying to figure out what the heck to do with music in the church, right? And they've got all these programs, and they literally were just saying, they have the most amazing organ. I haven't even heard it, it just is so gorgeous and beautiful. And if one of you is an organist, I'll fly you down there. It's unbelievable. And I got to hear this thing. But they don't know what the heck, they don't know, they're struggling so intently on what does music actually mean for this church, right? Something to have an unbelievable organ, and I can't wait to hear this thing. I have a great band who plays. What the heck does this mean for them? What does it mean for somebody to be able to lead? Is it just kind of the motions? And again, my hope is that wherever you land, whatever you do, that you ditch all the old I pray that for my friends in South Florida, that they're able to see, they need somebody living amongst them and longing to be a psalmist among them, to lead them somewhere, because they've got somewhere to be, they've been alive, they've been inspired, That's my hope for you. And, we could chat about a lot of things. What I'd love to do is maybe hear from you. There's been a few times I've been on campus, some of you guys I've been able to chat with before. As we were sharing earlier, again, I would drive up here in 3 hours just to hang 30 minutes with Dr. Bradley. It's amazing. You guys have been added bonus to that. And I love some of the things that he was able to say to me. And I was just thinking as we were chatting, that I don't feel this inspired, more inspired than this when I get to just hang out with college students, because you guys see the world a little differently than I do. And I think you see God a little differently. And I think you can begin to imagine and dream about what His calling and role for you in that world is. And that fires me up. The last thing we need is just going through the motions, church music, and you guys are well beyond that. That fires me up. So I'd love it. I know we have some more time. I'd love it if we just had some conversation. If you have something to share or ask, or heck, I'll sit down with Dr. Bradley and share with us. But I'd love to open that up to you guys if you want to chat about something. So.
Yeah, I have a question for you. You seem that you talk a lot about being involved in the community in your church, and I've actually started to be involved in a community group at my church, meeting one for our college ministry. And I found it really great for my growth. I'm wondering, what do you guys do at FNC that are kind of, get a tight-knit community and get to know each other?
Absolutely. Obviously, when you serve somewhere with people, when you have something that, especially when I have something that binds me to people outside of just the stage, that's another level for me. So many of us will spend a lot of hours in front of people, performing, reading, worshiping. It's all amazing. I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for what God has for you in that. But whenever I'm sharing a great meal or in Bible study or serving the community, there's a lot of ways that our church serves homeless. We're down the road at the church in North Carolina. Houston, a lot of ways we serve down there. And it's those times where I feel like, okay, I am part of this. I am actually living and loving the folks rather than just standing in front of them. And that's a while for me to find the value and the beauty of that, And that's a concern for me as we, I have the joy of talking to a lot of young songwriters and worship leaders and artists, and there can be, we can be a stubborn bunch, and we can be a fairly reclusive bunch, and sometimes it's a little easier for us. Sometimes it's just easier to get in front of people. It's maybe a little harder to sit down and share coffee and share life, confess, and be in the mix of life. And so, to be honest, I've had to be reminded of that a lot. Hey, your calling is way beyond holding the guitar and what's about. And again, when I look at the Psalms, I don't see a lot of mention of performance. Well, we know that David performed, right? I mean, the king beckoned him. He clearly was great. Right? And so, I always imagine him more as James Taylor rather than, I don't imagine he had a band, like traveling band. But he clearly was good at what he did. But you don't get 150 songs that talk about performance or aesthetics or set list or flow or whatever buzzwords. You really get a ton of his and others. You don't throw about half the songs. You get a good glimpse into his life, and you get a glimpse into a lot of others, including Moses. You just see a lot of living, like real life, honest, seeking God, confessing, doubting. And so a lot of times, I just go, man, do I live life like that? Am I living life with others? Right? Am I confessing? Am I doubting? Am I really digging deep? that has really fired me up over the last few years, just to go, and we actually have a pretty beautiful roadmap. It's not just an example or a hymn book in most scripture. 150 of these songs that really take us from one end to the other, and mountaintops and valleys. There's a lot in there that we could have to do. But obviously, being a part of a community, you're either in or you're not. And so that's been something. There's been times I've really screwed that up. I've been this guy, and I'll see you next Sunday. That doesn't fly, and that produced very little fruit in my life and my music. So I've got to be very cautious of that. My wife and I both.
Talking about in one of our classes about having a rule of life and balance the things you have for your congregation, your drums, your children, your family, do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, that's good. One of the things that having a family now, and one of the things that I've tried not to do is to take those two and separate them, right? And I also feel that way about my music when I'm at my community, and then we've had the privilege to travel quite a bit. We get to play outside as well. And early on, I imagined those two things as these two separate. I lead a community, and then I will show up somewhere with a band, we'll do a concert, or worship setting, whatever they get on to, or whatever the case is. And this is totally something isolated from that. Oh, by the way, I do that. And pretty early on, I just thought, man, that's lousy. That's a really lousy thing. It's dishonest, And I've tried in every way to see those two things merge together, so that when I'm outside of the walls of my community, that I'm being extended, right? I'm being offered. And I'm very much rooted and connected there. And so when I think about my family, the needs of my family, I try to do the same thing in the sense that there's a lot of people around me, including my next door neighbors, who my friend, we call him Junior Rodriguez, and he was baptized 2 years ago in my church. It was one of the most beautiful days we've had. And I think of them, they want to help meet the needs of my family. They love my kids. We have dinner with them once a week. They're a huge part of our lives, right? So it's to look at the needs of my family, look at the needs of my congregation for them. So probably these two things actually go together. And it's not always easy. There's a lot in there that takes a lot of effort, time, attention, planning, and all those things. But it's really beautiful when you go, man, I don't live solo. And I wasn't intended to. Whether it's in music or whether it's as a father, as a husband, as a neighbor. So, again, that's a long figure it out. Somebody else?
In the time after you got out of college and were wrestling through what you felt God was calling you to do, what did you cling to at this time? What did you find security in this uncertainty?
Yeah. Again, one of the things about music, and I know that all of our journeys are going to be different. I just can speak for mine. But one of the great things about the journey that I was on is that I didn't have any clear answers, right? I had friends that were graduating from Baylor that had pretty, they kind of knew what their next step would be, and step after that, and that's awesome. They're amazing people, have amazing jobs. But when I left here, I didn't have that. I didn't know exactly. I didn't even know what the job description was. In fact, I wasn't even aware that the job description existed, in the sense that I was feeling like it was a call in my life, even a few years earlier. I grew up in church, so I'm like, I don't have a clue. Right? And so, if you can relate to being in that place, you go, man, it's in those places where you feel really close to God. When you don't necessarily know what your income's going to be. God's gifted you guys with immense talent, right? So all of us are going to go, we've got some kind of gift that we see as from God, right? And so, but how in the world do we use that, and how in the world will that talent help us keep the lights on? And then how in the world will that talent be of value to anyone else besides being the church community? I didn't have a clue. And it's in those places that I felt like I've actually known God. there's been years in my journey where I kind of had my plans and my thing mapped out, you know. Those are the years that I felt like I was probably on autopilot and fairly distant from what God might have had. You know what I mean? I just read this great book on suffering, and there's a lot to unpack in it, and I haven't gone through some huge crisis in my life. We've all dealt with loss in our life, but I loved it because it really he highlighted just the intense awareness that you are that God is near you, you know, and that God's presence really is promised to you. You don't have any promise from hiding from pain and suffering or doubt, or even the smaller things that you and I leaving Baylor and not knowing exactly what's up. But it's in those times that God promises nearness. You know? And I'll take that. You know, I've kind of experienced both. It's a good place to be. And so my hope, you know, I don't want you to, I don't want either of us to have to get hit by a truck to go through that. You know, I don't want either of us to experience some deep suffering to go through that. Might be all right if you don't have every answer leaving here. Because we'll surely be in that out those times. Somebody else? Yeah, I would, if we have a few minutes, I'd love to hear from you guys. You know, I'm talking about songwriting. And I'd love to hear just some thoughts on your observations in the church and songwriting being local versus corporate or global. And maybe for some of you who are songwriting, what that looks like for you and what you hope to see God doing. If anybody want to share that, you'll
I really appreciate what you said about it's the songwriting being birthed from experience and just being human, and what that means to be human. Because that's been my journey as a songwriter this past year, realizing that honesty and authenticity goes a lot further. A lot of times, like I would sing songs in leading worship, and I'd be like, "What do these words even mean?" Like growing up in the church, like they've meant a lot to me over the years, these words, but they've become just kind of flowery, and they don't really like speak to like the depths of my soul. And going through a lot of grief, I had no songs in my repertoire that I could use in just my own personal worship, or when I would lead worship with my church family, and just found that insufficiency, that lacking, that void in songs, especially in more contemporary context. So what, and that's encouraging for me too, because I always, whenever I'm encountering a situation of worship planning, I'm like, I don't have anything that fits this, like what I would like to say, or to try to reach out to the community, this need. What are some other areas other than lament, which I'm so encouraged to see other people embracing lament, and what are some other areas and genres of the human experience that you see lacking in songwriting, and would you encourage us as young songwriters to endeavor?
Yeah, that's great. I would encourage us to simply look at the songs as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
To me, when we do that, there's that's what's so staggering to me. When I felt like God had opened my eyes to what was actually happening in this collection. You know,
Yeah.
150 of these really they don't camp out on one season of humanity. They kind of see it all. You know.
Some of it's pretty offensive. Like the dashing babies on rocks. Like,
Really, yeah.
I mean, that's one of the most offensive passages ever. But at the same time, it's one of the most honest passages in all the Bible.
Absolutely. You know, and I have a ton of really great friends who they really camp out and spend a ton of time. And it's a beautiful thing. But their main focus is theology and their doxology. Now trust me, that's worth camping out on. All right, we shouldn't be a bunch of heretics leading church. But what you see in the Psalms, what I think it gives us a little bit of liberty to do is to just be human, right? And again, we ought to be careful about what we write. We ought to give a lot of great attention to that. We ought to just be very mindful of it. But what I see in the Psalms is some very honest, open dialogue, conversation with God that I think is happening deep within us, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's times for us to give voice to that. And it doesn't always have to be, it doesn't always have to be sorrowful. It doesn't always have to be this calm, reflective thing happening. But do we have some space in that emphasis for theology that allows us to be human and to be honest? Because that is what you see in the Psalms. And so if it really is a roadmap for us, or at least a glimpse into our interaction not only as a worshiper, but as worshipers, so in the corporate sense, man, we have a broad painting to start on. That's awesome to me. So I don't know what else you mentioned, like what other things are lacking. I'm not sure. But my hope is that you and I, we hopefully are looking at least starting at the Psalms and going, what's lacking in us? What are we not writing about, sharing about, leading on, inviting others to?
I think it's the most rewarding things is when we knock down those walls and we're able to be human. Because I think typically we're afraid to be human in worship because it seemed humans usually deemed as weak, and we forget that Jesus was fully human as well, and to be restored and redeemed to be fully human again. So I think that's maybe a misconception for us as leaders in the church too that we need to move past.
Absolutely. And again, to go back to my reference to my time in Nashville, there's some unbelievable songwriters there, but my hope is that the songs that you and I are singing 10, 15 years from now, and by the way, Baylor, because I'm a Baylor Bear, there's been a lot of really great songwriters that have come and that will be coming out of you. And so, my hope is that a lot of the songs that you and I get to be a part of and that we'll be singing in our communities are not just birthed in a songwriting appointment, but they're actually birthed through you guys living here and leading in a way that's just scriptural and honest. And that part excites me, honestly. I look forward to that. And it's humbling to be hanging with you guys, knowing God's got some.
What's your experience in co-writing, right, and next to the team?
Yeah, and let me be clear, I love to write. I love to write with others. There's no place more vulnerable, right? And I know you can relate to this as you're collaborating on things here in school and new songs and friends. It is the most vulnerable place you can be, and it'll drive you mad. So I love collaborating. I think that's a beautiful thing. And honestly, the times that I feel like that really good things come from it, but there are other times that I can actually be myself. When I try to sit down and fake my way through a song, I'm just not that gifted. I'm not those country music songwriters who just go and they've got something, right? And so I love the idea. What I'm not so crazy about is just the idea that the life you have ahead of you as someone who's going to be voicing the prayers of the church is somehow going to be planned out, structured. There are certain disciplines in songwriting, which, on another day, I'd love to hear from you guys and chat some about some of the disciplines. Maybe you become better songwriters. Clearly some things you can focus on that can be a part of your exercise, that can be a part of becoming a better songwriter. But ultimately, I think great songs are not going to come from just us putting on a okay?
Sometimes I wonder if maybe one of the disconnects we have in songwriting is that we have this idea that songwritings have to come out of our experience. And I wonder if sometimes we ought not be more biographical rather than autobiographical, and we ought not write what somebody else needs to say. We ought not tell somebody else's story, the story that they're not capable of telling, at least. And I think otherwise we're always caught in living our own experiences, and maybe how much what we were talking about this today in the mental choir. How much pain can you have experienced when you're 21 years old? A lot, but maybe not very much at all. And so we're riding out of a different, it's just sitting here thinking, why is it that we're doing this service that we've been working on the last 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to do as a community in January on brokenness. And this is a theme that came up through our group was let's do a service on brokenness. Well, last night in really working and putting this together, we have almost no songs that aren't happy and no songs that, I mean, there are very few that aren't, that really get into that are expressive enough of pain that really are worthy. I mean, we worked so hard last night and we came up so empty. Even though we had 25 or 30 songs that we thought were going to work, they still weren't broken enough to say what we needed them to say. But why is that? And why are we not writing honestly? I mean, we're all talking about pain, and yet, we have a happy church. Why can't we?
That's challenging to me too. Part of what I feel strongly about for all of us is that you're not just voicing the prayers of you, you're voicing the prayers of the community, of a local community. And so within that community, if you're living life with people, you're going to have something to talk about. You're going to have something to say. You're going to have some life to share. I love that. I think it's great. I'm working on an EP right now called Texas, and it's kind of my version of like Texas country, whatever that means. And what I've loved about it and trying to exercise, my songwriting is that I have felt more open to write about things that I haven't necessarily experienced. And that's been challenging to me, right? One thing to kind of just, here's what I'm going, is that you can really be a storyteller. And that's something that I felt like stretched me. Like, I could tell a story that may not just be mine. I think that's great.
How have you had to confront, I just read Michael Gunger's new book about creativity and songwriting, and he spends a lot of time in there talking about combating commercialism and how that has destroyed church music and lots of other things, creativity in general. How have you had to battle that? Because I know, you're writing things for your own context, but as trying to make a living as a singer-songwriter, you also have to, at some point, give in some things to the commercial side of things. So how has that affected you in the way you approach songwriting for maybe 2 different contexts as well?
If I had some more time to dive into it has a lot.
Yeah.
Dr. Crowley and I were sharing, obviously you guys are fully aware of just the complexities of what's happening in the music business, of the new consumer models, if there are any left, of how revenue's made with music. And I was telling Dr. Crowley, this is a horrible time to own a record label.
Yeah.
It's a horrible time to own a publishing company. But it's not a horrible time to be an artist, and I really feel strongly, and Michael's a good friend, but he really is providing some leadership on that. I feel like it's the best time to be a creative within the local church. And it's for that reason, because the commercialization and the demands of business that have been on music, and I would say even to a further degree, music within the church, are now being backed off. To be frank, there's not as much money in it.
Right. Well, I heard you talking with him about Derek Webb and Noise Trade, and being one of the co-founders of Noise Trade and being sharing that way. And I think, I've read a little bit of his stuff, but of saying that actually you can make more money doing, you may not be as rich, but you're going to be, you can make more in different instances.
There are going to be revenue streams there.
Right.
I think what I'm excited about specifically for the church is that you and I will be able to pay our bills. Again, the people in this room represent some amazing talent. You guys will go and do things that I can't even imagine. What excites me though is that you will have to now, instead of having a pretty direct path to a career, you will have to explore and find out for yourself. And what that means is you'll have more control.
Sure.
And you'll be able to really do and express yourselves in ways that maybe you wouldn't. And it doesn't, I don't care if you're like, signed to a record deal, if you're serving in a local church, or if you're an organist, I don't know what in the world all of this will do. But because of that, because of what's happening in the music business, I think this is the best time for musicians within the church. I think we're going to see and hear the best songs that we've ever had because of that. I think it's going to be a healthy thing. And Derek Webb is a guy who's written a few things. One of the things, a piece that he wrote called "A Middle Class Musician," which was really great. If you Google that, I don't know if it was in a magazine or what, but I read it, and it was mainly like, hey, the old model's out, and if you're going to be a musician, and again, it may not apply specifically to you, what your career path might be, but there's some principles in it that I think are really great, and I haven't heard a lot of people voice it like he did. So, but yeah, you're right. That excites me.
Has that affected? He takes one of the appendices is looking at contemporary music and breaks it down by tempos and chord structures and all that sort of thing. And has that affected the way that I need to write so many songs in my album at 135 beats per minute?
There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Those conversations are very legitimate. 2 records ago, and we made a record I'm proud of called Miracle, but it's not my best record. And we shelved several songs, and we added 3 or 4 songs that we didn't necessarily feel were great, but that the label was hopeful would be radio hits, right? And they weren't. And I didn't think they were the best songs on the record. I think they were the most honest songs, and they weren't hits on the radio. And so honestly, in my mind, you have 3 or 4 tracks that were wasted. I'd still love to keep on the record. But for me, that was I learned a lot from that experience, because when we talk about the effects of the market, the effects of business on songwriters, that affected me greatly. There's a couple songs that we actually put on our latest record that should have been on that record, right? And so that's legitimate. The other thing that's happening in Christian, well, not just Christian music, but people don't listen to radio. When I go hang with high school students, I go, hey, who listens to radio? None of them. They create their own radio. They put their own playlist together, and that's what they do. I also think that's a really great thing for the church. I'm excited about what that means for young graduates who are going, all right, I may not get rich, but I feel called to do this. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it wisely, do it well, do it responsibly, and I'm going to do it the way God put people in me to do it. That's exciting. Anybody else? I know we're running against this time.
What things have you done to ensure you're continuing spiritual?
Well, again, going back to, is my life more than just this? And for a while I wasn't. And so my life to Christ felt very out of power. And so when that shifted in my mind, you go, man, I'm not just, this is honestly, this is kind of a reflection of everything else I do. The life of David is reflecting everything. These songs of David are reflecting this life of his. My living and my reading and my conversation and my pursuing relationship, my relationships that are healthy, that I care deeply about. Those are the things that actually give me something to sing. And that's what I love about music within the church, is that you might be able to fake it for a little while, but not very long. Right? So for you and I, we're going to have something to say. We're going to have a life that leads us to say, look, I don't buy it. Again, I love hanging with high school and college students. Their BS radar is it's on pretty high. In fact, there's a lot of grace given for somebody they believe. So you and I, we don't last very long in what we do without actually being led to sing something honest that's coming from somewhere. And so there's a lot, obviously there's a lot of ways. Time in God's Word, time in relationships. A lot of our songs come from seasons in our church studies, things like that. All that's got to make its way into music, otherwise we're going to come.
So, do you, sometimes that, I love to journal a lot, and so, sometimes when I'm just really struggling, I can just get hot and going,
was here at Baylor when Rich Mullins, if you know any of his music, he died one of the years I was here. I love Rich Mullins. I remember hearing this interview with him, and he said, you know, I consider myself a weaver of songs. And he had all these fragments, a quilter at least. He had all these fragments that had been a part of his own personal time. And when he least expected it, those fragments began to weave together and become a song. I remember that and thinking, not only is that a discipline for you and I, but that is one of the things that songwriting go, that's something I can do. I can sing into my iPhone, have all these little fragments, I can journal well, I can sit down with a guitar when it's just me, no one is remotely close, and I can sing and express, and maybe that becomes a song. Those are some disciplines, but also I found it kind of, just like you, I found it very compelling and very honest and big part of it. And so you know, I've never had the guts to, you know, there's these circles of worship music where, I don't know what you call it, but people get up and they just start singing. You know, there's no, hey, we're in the key of B, and we're going to, you know, 1, 4, 5, and we're going to whatever comes out, comes out. I've never had the guts to do that. There's a guy named Jason Upton, right? And he's really great at that, so I'll leave that to him. But when I'm by myself, I tend to do that. Where you're just like, man, whatever comes out. And I don't, you know, again, I don't know if it makes its way into the song or not, but it is.
It's been a very rich time. Thank you so much for sharing with us, and thank you all for engaging so well. And you never know what will come from a moment like this.
Yeah, bless you guys. Thank you.